Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you get me clear? Okay, very good. So my name is Ataharul Chowdhury. Those who don't know me, I'm assistant professor at the University of Guelph. So this is a paper with one of my MSc student, Paige, and we could together. So I decided to present. So this research, we looked into social side of adoption of soil health technologies. So for this presentation, I will actually walk through a few things, start with background and the methodology that we used and some findings that we tried to bring about social side of adoption of technologies. So you know, agriculture actually is unique because it draws on resources related to agriculture, but it also draws on the natural resources. And there are tremendous pressure for production of agriculture, which also have an adverse effect on environment, right? One way of mitigating that adverse effect is to how we incorporate sustainable technologies. But when we talk about sustainability, we know that it's not only about economic or environment, but there are also social and cultural aspects. But in terms of adoption of sustainable technologies, people mainly in research, most of the research actually focus on environment and economic side. There are less research on social and cultural side of sustainable agricultural technologies. So the research is from Ontario, and especially from Southwest Ontario. And Ontario is actually have Canada's 51% of farmland. And recently there is an increase of cover crop in Ontario. But Ontario Ministry of Agriculture identified that erosion of soil still is a problem. Although there is an increase of adoption of cover crop, which is one of the soil health technologies that we know. So that's why the ministry is actually looking at what is the problem that we have some increase of soil health technology, but still erosion is going high, right? So that's why we decided to look at to understand what the social and cultural and political factors associated with the Southern Ontario grain farmers' decision to adopt or not to adopt cover crops, and also to determine what services actually and knowledge sources that they use for adoption of those technologies. So these are two research questions related to the objective, like we have to look at what are the factors that affect decision-making process of grain farmers in Southern Ontario to adopt or not to adopt the practice of cover crops, and what types of support services do grain farmers access when making the decision to adopt a new technology, new practice. So the research actually in sequential step from identifying adopter and non-adopter and conducting a few interviews with them and coding those transcripts using in vivo. So what we decide after searching different network, we found 11 adopter and 5 non-adopter of cover crops. Those are farmers in Southwest Ontario, and you can see the map as we try to spread of those farmers across Southwest Ontario. So in terms of findings, one of the researches we found from findings here is that farmers actually have both owned and rented, and most of the cases rented land is higher than the owned land. So that's one of the things we found. Those actually have both adopter and non-adopter cases. And we also found that cover crop use actually is more in farmers with their own land, right? Ownership is important. And also we found that those who have actually adopted cover crops also have a succession plan. So generational continuation of agriculture is important. And in terms of beliefs, values, and attitude, we found that there are many commonalities between adopter and non-adopter. So there are only few things you see in the color boxes. You can see that in attitude there are a little bit difference between adopter and non-adopter. Those white boxes, they are more or less similar, adopter and non-adopters. So if we try to summarize that, adopter, they have more extensive personal networks, and they have involved in greater number of farms organizations, and they take more active role in you know, like especially in organizational leadership, and they 72% actually stated they are involved at least in more than 2 farm organizations. For non-adopter, they have actually smaller social circles, and they are less likely to identify personal later as resources when making decisions. So when they make decisions, they don't draw on their different resources, especially networks of organization and personal networks. And they involve in a small number of farm organizations and have less role in different farm organizations. And another thing we looked at, what are the trigger events for adoption and non-adoption. So you see that for non-adoption, especially is more about weather challenge and time constraint, location, workload. These are the main things. But for adoption, it's more about personal and social factors. We see that when people come to about non-adoption, especially talking to peers or seeing is believing, when they see other pharmacists actually adopting. So these are important factors when they decide to adopt cover crops. And in terms of organizational support, we have a system of it's called CCA. I don't know whether it's also in the US. You guys have that. So in French Canada, it's called agrologist. So certified crop advisor. So those are important sources when they actually decide to adopt. But we did not find that having using that sources is an important factor for adoption, but they use that sources for their farming practice. And also conservation authority. We have a number of conservation authority across southwestern Ontario. They also use conservation authority for the farming decision making. Okay, so this is for discussion of what you have seen in terms of result. So this is a model. It's called the zone of friction and zone of traction. So zone of friction, when any technologies actually, if farmers or anyone want to adopt, there are 2 things happen. One is zone of friction because there are some contradictory and conflicting ideas, and zone of traction, which actually track pathway for the adoption. So for this research, if you look at zone of friction is more about not seeing enough benefit, technical ability, challenge with cover crops, when they decide to adopt technology, time and workload, they are not open to ready for change or weather and location, lack of economic return. So these are the zone of friction. But zone of traction, which are more personal, more social factors. These are like interpersonal relationship, hearing someone else share their story, seeing the success of other farmers, seeing on farm benefits, shift of mind change or open mind change, and engagement with resources. So these are zone of traction. And also, in terms of trigger event, you'll see that most of the factors we found like is more social factors, like listening to a speaker or talking to other farmers or mentors or seeing is believing, right? So that's mainly social factors. And in terms of actor network theory, probably you know about actor network theory, which helps actually a lot of explaining technology adoption in different fields, so that any adoption decision actually happens because of the network of both human and non-human. And in our research, we found that the important factor here, how human, that is the farmers, and their institution and organization are actually aligned with each other. That's the most important thing for incomes. So there are number of social factors here, like with like especially exploring personal networks, when they think that there are inconsistency in the programming, and especially program focus for cover crop farmers. So these are the important things that we need to think about, especially when we consider the support service. Another thing is about willingness and motivation. Giving more information is not a solution. There should be some kind of personal willingness and motivation to utilize those information. So that's the important thing. That means you need to, as a programming for this cover crop adoption, we need to work on that aspect. So in terms of summary and conclusion, we can say that for adoption of cover crops is not a personal, it's also collective process. And adopter and non-adopter share more similarities than differences regarding their personal beliefs, values, and attitude towards sustainability of cover crops. And we also see that the role of personal change and willingness is very important, and the importance of social connection and networks are very important, and in terms of factors influencing adoption. And in terms of support service, we see that there are both benefits and drawbacks of support service in Ontario. There are some unequal access to resources. There are also different roles of conservation authorities. Conservation authorities do not always focus on farmers' benefit and voice in their programming. And there is also like lack of specific targeting of funding opportunities, especially when there is it is about the adoption of cover crops technology in Ontario. So we also propose some further research how to bring social factors when programming related to cover crops, and also evaluation of the relationship between conservation authorities and agriculture sector. And we think there could be also more additional research to be done, like how to enhance representation, especially farmers' voice, and also research into non-linear elements that involves in adoption of process of governance. So that's all about from us.
Start off with this is kind of an interesting perspective, looking at the social aspect of adopting specifically an cover crop. Can you talk a little bit about why the interest or why you guys decided to look at that aspect?
Yeah, as I mentioned, that in Ontario cover crops adoption has increased. But then the question is that there are still the soil erosion actually did not mitigate. So there is still increased rate of soil erosion. So cover crop is one of the technology that helps to mitigate soil erosion. And Ontario Ministry is actually a policy, a new policy to look at and work on cover crops and how to enhance that option. So from that policy inspiration, we thought there was no research recently done about adoption, and people always talk about economic and environment benefits, but there is no much discussion about social and cultural factors. So why farmers don't adopt, the easy question is that it's not going to be any benefit. But with that research, you argue that it's not only economic, you also need to think about personal network, generational transfer, and tradition that farmers have been practicing for a long time. That's also very important to look at programming for farmers.
Other questions?
Yeah, did I see correctly on one of your earlier slides, I assume it was a participant that was not an adopter, that it was because they thought the use of cover crops was a fad?
Cover crop?
Cover crops, that the use of cover crops was a fad?
Yeah, like.
So is that what one of them told you?
Pardon?
Is that what one of the participants told you?
Yes, yeah.
That's very interesting.
Going back to the question of Dr. Edwards, did you examine the socioeconomic, educational, resource base of adopters versus non-adopters and their relationship with all these attitudes, beliefs, and opinions, whatever you measure? Did you collect any information on those?
Yeah, I actually did not touch much on this aspect, but probably one of the slides you see, very interesting question, that both adopter and non-adopter actually have equally access to resources. When it's resources, these are educational materials and information. They both have. There is no, we have not seen much differences. So from there, this is not a definite conclusion because it's a very qualitative research. We cannot generalize. It triggered us to think about probably information or educational factors. One of the important things, but you need to also think about more personal and social networks. It's not like you give more information and you can expect that non-adopter will automatically, be convinced and use that information. So that's the new rules of extension in your presentation. You're talking like you have to facilitate network. You have to facilitate their network with their friends, with their organization that they work, which actually influence ultimately use of those resources.
Yeah, social participation.
How much did the pressure for a quick cash crop turnaround have to do with their adoption of the waiting for the cover crop? Does that make sense?
We did not ask question on that aspect, but it's a very good, good point that you mentioned.